Thanks for coming on the show. We really appreciate it, Josh. You and I have actually been in touch in the past through, I want to say you DM'd me on Twitter at one point about doing a video intro for SimStaff.
Did I slide in your DMs? Did I? I slide in a lot of people's DMs these days. That's the nature of the business,
right? Conveniently, I think you mentioned something when I made the last one, and then the DM was sent, and then we lost contact after a while, and now you're on the podcast. So welcome, sir. I appreciate you.
Well, I'll start by saying apologies for not following up. There you go.
Hey, it's okay. I have a little bit of work to do with this. They're real rough on our time. This Grid Finder company, they want all these things made.
Yeah.
No, it's awesome to be here. I'm a big fan of the podcast, and obviously Tom we've known each other for a while, and it'd been awesome to see what you guys are kind of building. So hopefully a nice chilled out chat and see what goes on.
Yeah, that's still Tom. I don't know if you get surprised by it still, but when anyone says, "Oh, I'm a fan of the podcast," I'm like, "People listen? What?"
Yeah. We had somebody open a bug ticket today on Grid Finder, and I was chatting away to them, and then they were like, "Oh, and by the way, I love the podcast. I'm in Australia." And I was like, "What?
Wow.
What? That's nuts. That's like, you see it on the stats. You can, we can see our stats of where people are, and we know that like 4 or 5% of people are in Australia, but
they're not just a tick mark on a little graph."
Oh my god,
this is so nuts. Cool.
Anyway, I'm kind of glad that we started the podcast like this. Chris, you saying, Josh sliding into your DMs about some work, because I think, Josh, it's probably fair to say that you are a super networker. You are everywhere. Like I have never seen anybody quite so active on LinkedIn, expos, conferences. Like you kind of dive into absolutely everything that's available in the sim racing esports world, which I think is fantastic, because I think it really shows that you genuinely kind of like what you're doing, which is a good thing. Is that fair to say? Is that a fair representation? The super networker.
I mean, it's a very kind compliment. I think
as he's changing you guys his probably LinkedIn profile, like job description, super networker.
I think it's one of those things, right? Like the space is growing so quickly, particularly recently, and we could all talk about the pandemic wave and that kind of stuff. But now that kind of doors are opening again and people are getting out and about, I just think it's so much better for kind of networking. And the same reason that I listen to the podcast, right, is because when you're traveling to and from these events, it's a great opportunity to get insight into how people kind of operate and see a different side to someone who's not on the screen, basically. So yeah, I'll take it.
Wow, Chris, Josh is using us for freaking market research. Oh my god, we just talk utter nonsense most of the time. This is crazy. We need to put a little disclaimer that we should not be responsible for any of the facts that we discussed during this podcast. So Josh, you are kind of intrinsically involved in nearly every element of sim racing that I've ever seen. Anywhere I've been, anything I've done, whether it's the expo, it's an event, it's even like a broader gaming event. We saw each other at Insomnia just a couple of weeks ago. You are there, right? Tell us the journey. Like, how did this start? Obviously, I kind of know a little bit about your background, but for our audience, tell us how you got into the sim racing world, but right from the beginning, like when you left school, what did you do?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been in sim racing probably for like 5 or 6 years now. I started off racing. I call it professionally. I was by no means, the fastest guy out there, but played like the F1 games on console, like a lot of people did, and fired off an email to Frostmaster, Fanatec, and Logitech all on the same day saying, "Hey, I want to take this a bit more seriously. Can you send me some kit and we can see what we can do?" Frostmaster came back. The others left me on red, but as the story kind of went, the journey kind of grew from there. Started competing a little bit on Assetto Corsa, and then moved into the event space after kind of graduating from university. Just seeing what sims were kind of doing actually at live events. Pandemic came in, so then joined David to help launch SimGrid and coach Dave Academy. And then around as things kind of opened back up again, moved back to kind of freelancing and built SimStaff off the back of that. So yeah, I think you're probably fair. I've done a little bit of everything, but just part of it trying to find my feet and see what I like, and the other part just because the space is so small, you can kind of bounce between a lot of areas, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's this is something that I really kind of want to nerd out on. So Chris, indulge me. Okay, so Josh has followed a really interesting path, and that's the path of starting your own thing, a startup, the startup life, right? So you've gone away from the regular income pay slips to, right, I'm now going to put my own food on the table, and it's a huge risk and it's scary and blah 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 blah. And I'd love to get into all that. But something that I want to discuss first is that I've noticed that in sim racing, it seems to be quite not common, but it's perhaps more common than in other areas. So if you think of your average sim racer, I would say that there is a higher percentage of sim racers who go on to stream or to try and get like they kind of explore affiliate codes, or they'll join like a proper team, and so they kind of take it seriously. Not everyone goes full time, of course, but a lot of sim racers seem to have that mindset of creating something for themselves, and to kind of build communities. Is that something you've seen? Do you think that resonates with you?
I think that's a really interesting observation, and to answer, I guess I kind of put the question back to you, which is like, I don't know if people do that because either A, they have a real passion for what they're doing, or B, because they're trying to almost like chase that path to real motorsport. And these are all kind of the building blocks along the way of like raising your profile, raising additional revenue to go racing. I think if you kind of follow that ladder up to the top guys, people like James Baldwin, Jardier, those kind of guys, they try to make the jump. So I don't know. I mean, what's your thoughts on the matter? It's an interesting one.
That's an interesting theory, actually. I hadn't really considered that perhaps people looking to create income through sim racing is a symptom of sim racing being a common springboard into motorsport, which is what I think you're saying. I'd actually kind of seen it more of a sim racing has many like facets. There's lots to it. There's a whole ecosystem around it, as you know. So we're talking league management, we're talking engineers, coaches, livery designers. There's a lot of skills that you can pick up just from being within one of these communities. And then you kind of start dabbling in little bits here and there. And then we notice people who are like, oh, I just did my first livery, guys. What do you think? And then 6 months later in our Discord, we'll see them say, right, I'm now open for commissions and I've done this website and blah, blah, and they've kind of gone for it, which I think's, I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite parts about the sim racing community is that lots of people are that passionate about it that they're looking for ways of making their passion their full-time job. And that's exactly what you did, right? You kind of, you entered the sim racing world through a more traditional path in the sense that it was a job, as I assume it was a full-time job with a salary, etc. But then at some point you decided, you know what, I want to do my own thing. So it would be great to kind of understand your mindset. Like what were your considerations leading up to that jump? Because let's be fair, it's scary, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think this is really where we're going to probably geek out a bit, Tom. But it was kind of twofold. Obviously, global factors kind of contributed to it. I wasn't going to be able to go out on events anyway because there was nothing going on. But the other part is, being someone who was okay at kind of sim racing and driving and stuff. It was like either you can be part of the show or you can be part of making the show. So for me, that was kind of like the big thing of like, I guess the whole reason I started Sim Staff, because you go to a live event and the people running the sim in the vast majority of cases are just events companies who have simulators. And I feel that's different to a sim company running simulators at an event, if that makes sense. So, when you kind of take that mentality to it, it's like, let's just do things properly. And in the same way you guys developed a great ecosystem for hosting leagues and for broadcasters and, livery creators to kind of have their platform, I'm trying to do the same in the event space so that people can trust what they're seeing when they turn up to the event, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense. Like, you very clearly highlighted there the problem that you're trying to solve. I suppose what I'm more interested in is like, what were your personal considerations? As in, you've got bills to pay, and you start a startup, you've got no guaranteed income for a little while. So was it a side hustle first and then it became a full-time thing, or have you raised investment or savings? Like, just because I imagine, given the assumption I made earlier on in the show that a lot of people in sim racing do go on to start their own things, a lot of people would be interested in, how have you made it? And by made it, I mean, how are you now supporting yourself full time? I'm not talking about the money you're making through contracts. I'm just really curious to see how you justified the risk in your mind when you went from safe job to startup.
It's such a great question. To be honest, it's not something I've ever sat down and thought about. So this is getting philosophically deep quite fast. But yeah, it's an interesting one. I think you know, I was very lucky. Obviously, I was working with David at the Sim Gardens Coach Dave Academy, and you know, with Thrustmaster, I've got sort of benefits and perks of the contract there, if you like. And I was loving what I was doing, but for me personally, it was like there's something about live events that really excite me. You know, we've obviously bumped into each other a lot, Tom, whether you guys are doing podcast episodes or team events, whatever it is. And I just felt like that's the direction I want to go. And I guess in the same way, when you set up Grid Finder, if nobody else has kind of built that path, you kind of have to carve it yourself. So I gave myself 12 months to kind of see how we'd grow. And fortunately, we came out the other side going quite strong. And yeah, I don't know. It's a really interesting concept. I mean, what was it for you with Grid Finder? Obviously, that was a huge leap as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, the story is kind of nuts every time I kind of tell it, and I'll do it briefly because this is a podcast about you and not us. But maybe we should do a Grid Finder.
That could be like our Christmas
way.
episode this year. We did a Grid Finder Christmas show last year, so we could just do that again.
That's a good point. Yeah. So very briefly, I was transitioning from one career to another, and neither of them were anything to do with sim racing. I'd been in the military for 10 years driving warships, and I was converting my warship driving license. It has another name, but just it's essentially a warship driving license to a civilian ship driving license to go and do super yachts. COVID hit. I'd been a huge I wouldn't say sim racing fan. I think that would be unfair. That would be dishonest. I was an online racing game fan for about 10 years. So in 2011, during basic training, towards the end, when it got a little bit lighter, we had one rec room, a PlayStation, and one game, and it was Formula One, and I got hooked on it. And then since then, I've just loved playing racing games. Anyway, the pandemic came around, and I ended up getting stuck on an LNG tanker. This is a lot longer than I intended this to be. So I'm going to try and make this quicker. I got stuck on an LNG, so liquid natural gas carrier going between Qatar and the Mediterranean. It was meant to be 6 weeks. It ended up being 4.5 months because no countries would let seafarers off the boats because of COVID. And I had a lot of time on my hands with like some fairly dodgy Wi-Fi, but nothing to do. And I was looking into like Formula One content because the F1 drivers had started doing it. And I started thinking about sim racing, so I ordered myself a load of secondhand stuff for when I got home. And anyway, it was at that point that I realized that there was this problem with communities. So I started it just as a side hustle, just as a not even a side hustle because it wasn't making any money. It wasn't intended to make any money, but we got all this natural traction. Chris came along, was like, "This is a great idea. Like, I want to be involved." So he joined, and then very, very long story short, April last year, we decided to give this a proper go, and we raised some angel investment to support what the company's doing so that we can go out and build the platform that we're currently building. So I guess for me, it was a very kind of natural progression because I had the time due to COVID to see the traction, kind of de-risk it in my mind, and see what the business model was. But to be honest with you, I didn't really know what business model was at all. And this is something that I'm going to throw back to you now because it's too much about it. This is not meant to be a podcast about me. But obviously, I had no business background whatsoever. So I didn't know how to do accounts, like how do we hire people, like, you know, marketing, Facebook ads, Google, like nothing. Didn't, you know, Wix took me a long time to work out, which I know Chris will laugh at. So I did a lot of reading. So I read a lot of books like The Lean Startup, Entrepreneur Revolution, The Mum Test, blah, 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 blah. Listened to some podcasts. I felt that gave me quite a good grounding. And I eventually went on a 5-month accelerator course to kind of learn the basics of startups. What have you done as you've gone through the SimStaff journey? Who have you turned to? Like, what resources have you taken to kind of teach yourself how to create a business in sim racing?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it, and it's the same whether it's for, you know, commentary, broadcasting, liveries, whatever. You know, a lot of it's just kind of natural gut feeling, I guess, which I know is a bit of a cop-out answer, but the reality is, you know, at least with the event side of stuff, there's a very clear metric of whether an event goes well or not, usually indicated by the amount of people that take part. But prior to that, you know, I was really fortunate with David at SimGrid to have a great mentor in him. He's obviously got a huge background in business and startups. He even provided me coaching services whilst I was there. And so then you take what, I guess I kind of had the benefit of seeing a startup grow and learning from that what I wanted to kind of inject into mine. And then, of course, you know, you're right, Tom, you listen to podcasts, you read books, all this kind of stuff. But I think this really, like I said at the start, speaks to whether you're a broadcaster or whatever, like the steps are still the same. Go out with the product that you think fits, get some feedback from the market, and continue to then grow that product in line with your expectations. And I think the important thing is just making sure you really enjoy it as well, you know, because if I didn't enjoy events, I probably wouldn't have continued with sim staff.
Yeah.
And I'm sure with the same with yourselves, if you didn't enjoy organizing leagues and giving people that kind of accessibility and ease of use, then you probably wouldn't have done this either. So
it's really interesting actually hearing how it sounds like your journey was. I know this sounds like a really overused, horrible word, like an organic journey, kind of, as in it kind of just like it just grew naturally, and you kind of learn as you went on the job, etc., and you had that experience. But actually, like reflecting on my own experience, one of the best places to learn is your own network. Yeah. It's speaking to people who've been there, done it before, and understand either the whole market that you're in or a specific thing you have a problem with at any particular time. Now, you as the super networker that I declared earlier, clearly you surround yourself with a lot of people who have been there, done it, either businesses in the space or similar spaces. So do you think by being such a kind of prolific networker and connection maker, do you think that's helped you grow sim staff, not just through connections to potential customers, but also access to people that have been there, done it, and got really good advice for you?
Yeah, 100%. I think, yourself, Tom's a great example. Like the problems that I'm trying to solve are probably slightly earlier in the food chain were the ones you're trying to solve. And what I mean by that is, like, if you look at sim racing usage, there was a report came out late last year, and I think it said like 59% of sim usage is home users, and so 41% is public events. So you look at that and go, okay, so someone's got a sim at home, probably don't know how to race, or where to race, I should say. Then they go to a public event and they see a sim and they're like, oh, I've got one at home, so I don't really want to take part. If we solve the problem of them finding a place to race competitively, to have fun with their friends, form a community, they're so much more likely to A, go to that event with their friends, and B, then jump on the sim anyway and race against other people. So by getting that kind of read off the ground, by networking with people like yourself and others, I think it benefits us both in equal measure, really.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I've got so much out of just going to events, speaking to people face to face, people that you kind of keep in touch with throughout the year. Exactly. And then you have these events where everyone comes together and you get to discuss what's happened in the last year, but face to face over a beer, buy a sim rig, etc. And the value is enormous. So let's talk about events then. Let's talk about the event landscape. So we are now in the presence of the sim racing event expert. Okay, so let's get your take on the event landscape for sim racing. Like, what are the big names out there? What are the must go to events? And then afterwards, I want to dive into like how you think the event space, the physical event space generally, is doing.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of claims being thrown here, which are very kind of you, but I just need to make sure, but like, I think, the sim racing event space is really interesting at the moment. Obviously, we've got SRO Esports with the guys at ADAC Esports running that. F1 Esports probably been the most recognizable to a lot of people. And then you have obviously Formula E, which you guys obviously are involved with, and V10R League from Gfinity. So I think the landscape at the moment is very much, if you're a top level sim racer, you're now getting the opportunity to go to LAN, obviously ESL as well. Let's add to that list. If you're starting out, it's pretty bare bones at the moment. It is really just online leagues and communities. But I think we're seeing growth in the right direction. It's trying to be focused more around like a community sport and like a fan sport for people to watch. It's in a really interesting landscape. I mean, what's your guys' opinion of how it's grown and where we're heading with it?
Well,
Chris, I'm conscious that I've spoken a lot.
It's fine. When it comes to streams, actually, as you're mentioning this, I'm remembering a couple Twitter threads that have happened recently where it's, do you as a sim racer actually watch sim racing? And there was an overwhelming response, at least on some creators' threads, where most people were saying, why would I watch sim racing when I can just do sim racing? And that kind of opened up my mind a little bit to, what are we doing differently in sim racing than, say, Call of Duty or League of Legends or, pick any of the esports out there that exist and have millions of people watching at the same time? And one of the things that brings me to sim racing and why I kind of disagreed with a lot of these points of view when I was reading Twitter is, it's part of the community. So when you jump into a sim racer stream, or when you jump into ESL R1 or any of these streams, it almost feels more like you're paid attention to in sim racing than if you, for instance, I watch Call of Duty events and you're just a blip on the radar. You could throw anything out there and talk and no one's saying anything to you. Like, you're just ignored, basically. But in the world of sim racing, I get that personal satisfaction of like, oh, I'm part of a community here. I'm actually paid attention to, which sounds like pay attention to me, please. But you know what I mean. When you're watching and you're chatting, you want to at least be acknowledged. So in your eyes, what do you think we could do to change the mindset a little bit? Because I don't understand where specifically in the sim racing world people are saying, well, I would just rather do it than watch it. I'm like, well, I watch it when I'm at work. I'll just throw it on a screen and have it up.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So I went to the Apex Legends Split One playoffs in London, and that was a super interesting experience for me. First time I'd been to anything that was sort of non-sim racing as an event.
Sure.
And like listening to the crowd screaming for individual players as stuff was going on was like a completely foreign concept to me. It was like a football stadium. It was mental. But to be honest, I kind of agree with a lot of those comments that you disagree with. I think we need to be doing something a little bit different. I think people invest so much time into being sort of quick or good at sim racing that's probably the reason that they want to then race rather than watch it.
Sure.
I think we need to be doing something a little bit different with like whether that's the E-Racer Champions or like innovative event formats, something that makes people stop and go, oh wow, this is kind of cool. I hadn't considered sim racing in this light. And I think the other big part of it is we need to be targeting people who aren't already in the space. Something I've always said is if you look at airlines, for example, they're always about being like, more renewable and better for the environment. And obviously one side of that is like making faster planes, better planes, more fuel efficient. But the other part of it is like the in-flight experience. So if you're heading to a Grand Prix for the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, for example, imagine you can be watching race reruns of F1 Esports, which is carbon neutral, on the way out to the Grand Prix, for example. I think we need to be doing something a little bit different to just grab people that isn't typical, here's TV cams trying to mimic real life, because then we'll always be in the shadow of that real motorsport.
I think you just nailed it for me. And again, I'm a Twitter guy, so I see everything that I think of on Twitter. There was someone who said at one point that we need to stop trying to mimic real world motorsport and start being our own thing. Yeah, obviously a lot of us are racing in the simulator because of a couple of reasons. My reason, I can't afford to get into racing. So I'm like, okay, sim racing is my thing. I can afford to buy the kit for that. And ultimately, I don't ever see myself going, you know what, I want to be in a car. I want to actually race. Sim racing is the line for me, and I'm perfectly fine with that. So we need something a little bit different than just mimicking real world motorsport. And like F1, for instance, when you see any of the series out there that I guess try to be just like the normal broadcast, you're like, it's exactly. Trying to be like the normal broadcast, but it's not quite up to like the level of the normal broadcast. So you kind of get this like underwhelmed. It's not really fulfilling the needs that I'm looking for. But if we were to do something a little more crazy or a little more interesting or a little more outside of the box, I think it would increase viewership a lot.
And that comes back to what we were saying, right? It's the people who aren't already interested in sim racing and esports are going to love that. But I guess for the same reason, like the NFL has the halftime show and like all these analysis breakdowns is for the people who geek out on this stuff. Tom, obviously, I know you have the Grid Finder team. I'm really curious, like you were just in Monza, right? The team were in Monza. So
yeah, we got back.
Yeah, so speaking to the team, right? I'm really curious, like, was the driving what excited them, or was it the experience of like traveling to Monza, competing as a team that was like, what was the biggest, like, more exciting part for them, I guess?
Now, I can't speak for Tristan, but based on his reaction and the fact that we spoke about this at length when he was he was up, he was down, he was giddy, he was excited, he was nervous, he was terrified, and then he was ecstatic with our result. It was a lot of emotions. And I can honestly say that both the racing and the live element of it contributed equally, I would say, to the overall experience. And just for the listeners to give a bit of context, so SRO Esports Sim Pro Series. So they have the Pro Series and the Sim Pro. Oh, there's like 6 series, and I had to get my head around it before we started the podcast. In fact, I didn't. I asked Paul Jeffrey at the beginning. I was like, Paul Jeffrey, please explain to everyone, including me, what the hell is going on with SRO Esports, because there's 6 strands. And he did the most succinct, perfect way of introducing what was going on.
Episode to come out soon, right?
When we were there, yeah, literally in like 2 hours. It was very exciting. So essentially at Monza, so physical actually in Italy, Monza. And I know that you always have to kind of like drill that point in, because I don't mean like on the sim in this case. In the paddock, we had the Fanatec Esports Arena. In the Esports Arena, there were 24 sim rigs, and they ran 2 series during the race weekend. So on the Saturday, they had the whole name of it, I think, something like the Fanatec SRO Esports Pro Series, and that is nuts, right? So that is where the real world SRO teams put a real world driver into the rig for an esports race, and they can win actual points for their team. So those points are worth money, like lots and lots of money. And so they spend a lot of time investing in their sim racer for that race. And then on the Sunday, we had the Fanatec SRO Esports Sim Pro Series. So Sim Pro Series. Now, the Sim Pro Series is essentially the sim racing teams who are running a series completely separate to the usual real world SRO series. And you had Lamborghini, I think, had 2 or 3 teams. Ferrari had 2 or 3. By teams, sorry, I mean drivers. So Lamborghini had 2 or 3 drivers. Ferrari had 2 or 3 drivers. Mercedes had 3 drivers. Williams had a driver, but I think it was with Mercedes. And then Mercedes have one with Unicorns of Love. And then Into the Breach was there. And anyway, BMW was there. So you had all of these huge brands. And Gridfinder, we were the underdogs by a long shot. We scored a point. 24 cars. We came 15th and scored a point. We were absolutely buzzing. It was like we just won the whole championship. It was crazy. But the interesting thing, there's lots of interesting conversations happening in the paddock, and it was great to chat to everyone. Alessio at AK Esports, AK Informatica, speaking to him a lot, speaking to Aris, speaking to the guys at Kunos. It was really, really absolutely fascinating. I was in my element. But I had a really interesting conversation with Sam, who is the CEO and founder of Into the Breach Esports. Now, most of our listeners, I would hazard a guess, haven't heard of Into the Breach Esports, but they have just qualified for the Paris Majors for CSGO, right? So that is enormous, right? So they are top level tier 1 CSGO. So now we're talking millions and millions in prize money. We're talking millions of people actually watching, hundreds of thousands of people on the stream, right? That's where they operate. They make a huge amount of money just from selling skins, like gun skins, essentially on CSGO. So these guys are a big deal. And here they were in Monza in a sim racing tournament, and it was the first time that they'd done it. So we had a really interesting chat about why that traditional esports, which is a weird combination of words anyway, were there doing sim racing. What was the appeal? And we were kind of going back and forth. And one of the things that we discussed was how sim racing is essentially 2 worlds colliding. It's motorsport and gaming. And now there's 2 different approaches to how you manage these events. And one is kind of like typified by what SRO do, and the other by what ESL Face It are doing. So SRO is going all in on the motorsport element of that mashing together of gaming and motorsport by putting it in the paddock. So during the race weekend, the esports. So if you look at the schedule, all around the paddock were all the big posters of what was going on. The esports series was featured on it. The live TV schedule, the esports series was on the live TV schedule. So that was one way of doing it. You integrate it into the motorsport world, and so you get all the motorsport fans be like, oh, okay, cool, this is interesting because it's a version of motorsport. And then what ESL Face It do is they completely shun the motorsport side of stuff, and they put it in the ESL Arena in Poland during the CSGO Dota League of Legends tournaments and have it on one of the stages. And so you're kind of showing it as another type of gaming. So I'm really interested to watch which one is more successful. And you know, I've seen the numbers on streams, etc. ESL, the first round did really, really well. The numbers have dropped significantly since then to kind of like 200-300. Yeah. So we're talking less than, you know, PSGL and WOR, which is really interesting. In fact, literally 20 minutes after we finish our podcast today, we've got Morris from Rensport, CEO of Rensport, on the podcast to chat about this, which would be interesting. But the SRO Esports series seems to have quite a significantly kind of high and consistent number of viewers. So Josh, let's throw this back to you from like an events perspective. Why do you think one is doing better than the other? Do you think the physical location matters. And there's an Expo question there as well about physical location, but we'll go to SRO versus ESL first.
Yeah, definitely. I think you've nailed it there. There's two different types of products kind of being presented. I think, with the SRO product, it's obviously very polished and very, very clean, and really appealing to that kind of motorsport audience there. I think with the ESL product, it's obviously a little bit more different. And I think just as important though, I think if ESL can get it right with targeting like the gaming audience rather than the motorsport audience, it should kind of grow. And I think equally, if you were to kind of put both of them, say, in a stadium of equal size, see which one sold more tickets, I think for me, that would be what's the interesting metric. Because, I mean, as we all know, viewership for sim racing broadcasts can fluctuate quite heavily. I think, obviously, is it Gran Turismo is going to be in the Olympics for the next series? The viewership there, how much of that is
I'm
gaming
so
audience?
Excited to see what happens with that.
So it's one of those. I think that the metrics are going to be so indicative. And I think in both cases, they're doing a good example of how events should be run. And I think the experience of having the players on site so people can get up close with them and speak with them. I mean, I'm sure you experienced it at Sim Expo. Like putting faces and personalities to the names is so much better than just here's a league race with so-and-so competing, right?
Yeah, 100%. It's, I think the nature of sim racing versus other esports is that you tend to have a lot more players all at once. Yeah. So, you have... for a traditional esports event like CSGO or Dota, it's usually like 1 versus 1, as in one team versus another team. And so you've got a limited number of people that you get used to, you have your team, you learn them. Sim racing, not only do you have a lot more people kind of on the track at once, could be 30, 40, 50, but also the teams seem to be a lot more fluid because there is no structured market yet. Whereas with CSGO, Dota, League of Legends, etc., there is an established economy for players. So players get bought and sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so when they go into a team, they're there for a long time. And the fact that they've moved there is a big news event. And if you follow a team, you know who's coming in and out. Now, for F1 Esports, I think they're quite close to achieving that because they announce their teams all about the same time. And so you can see as people are moving around, like David Tonitza going to Lamborghini, for example, people you can track it. But for most sim racing esports series, you can't, because most series will allow a team to have as many drivers as they want. So every round could be a different driver. And so now your loyalty has to be with the team, the car, perhaps. So there's in the chat, I was really interested actually in the SRO chat during the race on Sunday. I noticed that a lot of the comments were supporting the car manufacturers as opposed to the teams or even the drivers. So people were like, here to watch any Merc win, or like loving to see the Porsche doing well, blah, blah, blah. But they weren't necessarily interested in who was driving, which is completely baffling. I've never seen a Call of Duty tournament where I was like, I just want an MP5 to do really well this tournament. Like, it's like it's completely the wrong way around. But it's interesting how that's happened.
No, definitely. I ran an activation back in, I want to say it was 2018, 2017 maybe, at Silverstone for the Grand Prix. And if you've been to a Grand Prix before, for listeners who haven't, there's like a fan zone, and within the fan zone there's simulators you can jump on and set lap times. And we ran an activation over the weekend where we had like driver appearances, but from the esports team. So I think at the time it was like Sauber, it was Renault, it was someone else, McLaren maybe. And what was really interesting there is we had like the drivers come down with the team managers. There was an on-stage interview. There was an opportunity for fans to kind of drive with them. And people who weren't even into esports and sim racing were like checking it out and going, oh, wow, that's part of the McLaren team, or that's part of the Sauber team. And I think for me, that's like speaks back to what makes a good event, is when you're able to kind of reach to people who aren't endemic to the space and make it more of an experience and kind of build the driver's profile up from that. So then they can also then go to future events and even increase their following even more. So.
Yeah, well, again, not to hark on about the SRO event too much, but like the way that they did it was fantastic. They were right in the middle of the paddock, and of course, unlike a Formula One paddock, in SRO, anyone can wander around the paddock. So you can walk around the garages, you can walk around all the the motorhomes and the hospitality places, and all the cars are out there on show being worked on. You can see Pirelli like shaving tires and stuff, and you can be in there and experience it. And the Fanatec Esports Arena was smack bang in the middle of the paddock. And so there were all these teams. You saw that, the red jackets of Ferrari, and then the white and blue of Williams, and, the BS competition guys. And you see them all grouped up with their team merches, and you see it. And so people were really curious. So people that were going there probably to watch the GT3, GT4, GT2 and Clio Cup racing, they were probably there for the real world racing. But it was so huge, this huge kind of spectacle in the middle that it was really, and they had sim rigs on the outside that the members of the public could go and drive. When it came to qualifying in the race, there was probably maybe 60 seats inside the arena, which are obviously completely full. There was standing space at the back for maybe another 30 or 40, which was completely rammed. And then it was like 2 or 3 deep out on the stage, people trying to look in through the windows to watch. And I mean, not to, I love the Sim Racing Expo. I think the Sim Racing Expo is fantastic. I think we need to have it. I think we need to have some kind of annual event where everyone sim racing gets together, the manufacturers, the teams, we do racing, we do product reveals, etc. But I don't think there's any getting away from the fact that last year the racing was happening, and you'd look out at this huge room that had like 150 chairs, and there'd be like 12 people watching. So there's obviously something wrong. Whereas SRO seemed to have got it right. But if you then compare the broadcast quality of Sim Racing Expo and SRO, it was basically the same. It was, I mean, both were broadcast by Mike Yao and Steve Proudly, like from SimSport Solutions. Like it was the same broadcast. Like, obviously, they had different overlays, and Mike is always improving on his craft, and so there was probably minor improvements, but nothing to go from 12 people trying to watch to as many people trying to cram into this arena as absolutely possible. So it's really interesting to try and break down what it is about different events that seem to resonate with people more than others. Because you think at the Sim Racing Expo, you've got a captive audience to watch it, but it wasn't the case. Whereas at SRO, actually people who weren't sim racers were really interested to watch it.
Well, sorry,
you go, Chris.
No, there's something that I think racing fans need to recognize, and I think subconsciously we may not speak out loud about it, but there are a lot of portions of a race that are just boring. So let's compare it to like a CSGO or Call of Duty, right? Those matches last a couple minutes and they're over, and the new match is starting again, and you get that, okay, what's going to happen in the beginning, what happened at the end. You get that burst of energy a lot more often than you would in, say, even we'll go down to 30-minute race. Like you'll probably have 15 minutes of, well, there's not really a lot going on now, so I'm kind of, what else can I do at this point, So in the Sim Racing Expo space, there were times where there were people sitting at those seats. A lot of the time it was us because we're rooting on our team, but there was a lot of time where it's like, okay, well, how long can we really watch these cars go around when there's really nothing going on? So I think that's just a problem with racing in general, because even there are, let's take a couple of the tracks in the F1 calendar where you're like, oh, great, it's going to be exciting at the start and maybe the end. But generally, we're just going to be like, well, hopefully someone snags a barrier or something to make something exciting, I guess, And we as event planners and event organizers probably have to take that into consideration. Maybe showing the track action, quote, a little bit less and doing more stuff. So let's take one of these live events. Sim Racing Expo would be obviously perfect for, because you could walk around and someone could say, okay, let's go to the Fanatec booth, let's go to the AceTech booth, let's go to the whatever booth, and just continually have content throughout the entire time. But
the Trak Racer booth, just
the Trak Racer booth, of course.
Other brands are available.
Thank you for sponsoring the podcast there. Yeah, missed that one. But we need to have filler in some of these races, because let's just be honest and call a spade a spade. There are times where you're watching the cars go around and you're like, literally nothing is happening. Nothing.
Yeah, I think you've hit on something there as well, which is the way that you plan an online event or a league is different to how you plan an on-site LAN event as well. I've been fortunate enough to be involved in the F1 Esports series in various capacities since 2017 or whenever it started. And I remember in 2018, it was one of the years when Brendan won his championship, and I was sat behind stage as an admin, and I was watching him, just like watching all the drivers as you do. And seeing how he was driving was like just mind blowing for me. He was honestly like a robot. Just as soon as he was hitting his apex, there was like 7 or 8 different buttons. And it got me thinking, like, if you're a fan of motorsport and sim racing, I would love for us to have at the expo, like, pit garages where people can come in, they can watch the drivers. It's the one advantage we have as a sport, is that you don't need to worry about a car running someone over.
Right.
And equally with the Sim Expo, I think, had you had the opportunity for the paddock, for the teams to be an actual paddock where people are able to walk around, there's press interviews, there's this going on. But what you kind of had is someone who was, and I love the guys at Sim Expo, but I think what they got wrong is that they were kind of to drill down into the audience rather than push the audience like out, if that makes sense. You know, I think the way you approach bringing people to sim racing is different to, you know, how they did it essentially.
Sure.
Yeah, having spoken to Danny a couple of times, I think that is now the intention. I think that was very obvious. I think that the feedback was loud and clear. But I want to put something to you, Josh, something that I was just thinking about when you were talking there about formats for racing series, tournaments, whatever they are, should be different online versus LAN. And I keep going back to CSGO because we have a bit of an ethos in the office that we try to learn the lessons from esports, not from sim racing, because esports is the size that we want sim racing to be. So why would you look at something that hasn't quite made it there to learn your lessons? So we take a lot, Nikhil and Camille and Liam in the office are big into traditional esports. And so we kind of get a lot of insight from them about how we could do things differently. And something I've just realized when we're talking about broadcasts is that sim racing broadcasts, as they are now, generally are like TV broadcasts, so long, hour and a half, 2 hour, even like you could almost compare them to a film, right? Whereas a CSGO esports event is like TikTok.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's this, and in the same way that people's attention spans are moving more and more towards the TikTok format than the let's watch a 2 hour cowboy film on a Sunday afternoon. Like, I think, you know, sim racing probably needs to see that they're not going to get away with putting on an event which takes an hour. You know, at SRO, people were physically there, okay, and you sit down, you kind of experience it, but you get the benefit, as you were saying, as I was sat there on one of the seats in the third or fourth row, I could look over and I could see the Ferrari guys. I could see David Tanitza. I saw the Williams guy who in the first corner got crashed into, or I don't know, I can't remember whose fault it was, but then he got up out of his seat and stormed out of the arena. Like, you know, we saw that, we were right there. And so you get those benefits, and, you know, people were cheering and applauding overtakes and stuff. So there was a bit of, but I don't think you can get away with that for an online event. I don't think somebody's going to go to Twitch or YouTube and watch. So, but I mean, the way all of these games have pretty flexible formats. You know, F1 is a bit different because it's 5 like 25%, 50%, but everything else, there's no reason why you couldn't do 10-lap races. There's absolutely no reason why. You know, you could do a sprint, you could do heats, you could do knockout tournaments. There's so many things that we could be doing. Like the Expo, you know, the Expo could do an endurance race that's 6 hours, but actually could do, you know, a 20-minute race, and then in the interim between the next 20-minute race, they show, okay, this is the update on the endurance race, and then another 20-minute race, and then cut to an update on the endurance race. So you just get the updates on the endurance race, but you get to see these little short bursts, and each one is like a different, it's open wheel, or it's touring cars, or it's whatever, like just show off the best of sim racing. And I think those shorter bursts of competition is where we should be kind of perhaps focusing our attention. But I realize you're probably thinking, oh Christ, as an organizer, that sounds like a nightmare. If I could just put on an event that starts now and finishes at the end of the day, perfect. Well, I can go for lunch, have a drink, have a coffee.
No, I think you've hit something there, and I think it kind of comes back to what Chris was saying, which is like, for a lot of the time the broadcast is really boring. And to be honest, the story is true with any online league race, regardless of whether it's at the top level or the bottom level. You cross the line, you hit the power button, you go do about your day, you know, you go to bed or whatever the case is. Like, that's it. There's no, if you had like 10 5-lap sprint races, a LAN event, you'd be seeing people get out their chairs and arguing with each other and all this, and that's what the camera should be following, not just you know, a case of like, okay, someone's won, great, here's a quick interview, bye-bye. And I think what you're saying there about the format, we've been trialing something really interesting with Mike and Steve, which is like almost like a Soccer Saturday type broadcast format. So there's 4 or 5 different races going on. We'll jump between its different commentary teams, and that kind of solves the problem. But I think for me, speaking from an event perspective, I'd much rather like short bursts like CSGO, like rapid fire matches. There's plenty of drama. Then you can be clipping it, you can be using it for other content. And then the online stuff can be filler in between or leading up to the stories that you're kind of creating. But yeah, the emotions is such an important part that I just don't think we capture well on broadcast at the moment.
Yeah, I actually watch.
And that's something that SRO did quite well with the webcams.
Exactly.
They had every single booth had a webcam, and not only did they have a webcam, but they also had 2 cameramen walking around with bigger cameras that were kind of doing scanning shots. So on the bottom right-hand corner, as you were seeing P4 and P5 race, you would see P4's face as they're driving, or P5's face. And then, you know, as you get an overtake, you then get the big shot with the big camera going round, and the guy's kind of like smiling or just trying to keep focus. So you get that emotion. So they would, but I mean, again, it comes back to that online versus LAN. You can't do that easily for an online league race.
That's a lot of collaboration with all the drivers, and they're like, okay, sign into this software so you can have the webcam view. There is a lot, and there's a couple leagues that have tried that, and it's normally like 2 or 3 of the drivers that actually turn on their webcam for the view.
PSGL do it.
And it's very cool. It adds a lot to the broadcast, but driver participation in that side, because some of these guys aren't streamers and they aren't content creators, and they don't want to be, and that's perfectly fine as well.
See, I don't know. I kind of feel like if you're wanting to be on a competitive platform, you need to be open to, like, because I look at like the smaller leagues and communities, PSGL, for example, there's probably 4 or 5 main reasons why their league had a surge in viewership. Some of those being controversy, some of those being improvements in quality of show. But if you take out those personalities, it's just like every other league race. And I think, even listening to how Tom was speaking about the guys at Monza, it was like, we're the underdogs. It's that emotion, that passion. I just think it's such an important element at LAN. I agree with you, I guess, to a certain extent. Online, you can't really replicate that, but that's where the ecosystem needs to kind of work together, of like, people come to a LAN event, we capture the content, we push that back to you guys online to use, then there's more drama unfolds, all this kind of stuff. It's but the other part of it I was going to ask and kind of reference is that obviously the kind of option of choice as well is also really, really big. It's really saturated in sim racing. If you're watching, say, one of the teams, Williams, for example, you could probably find 4 or 5 of their drivers also doing their own personal streams. So you've got no incentive to support the main feed. And we see this with Jimmy, I guess. He probably pulls more viewership than most leagues do.
Yep.
And it's how do you manage that in an online environment? Because at LAN, you can just sit and watch him in his rig. You don't have to worry about checking his Twitch stream or whatever. Like, you have to see Jimmy in front of you,
That actually makes a really good point, because, I mentioned sim racing community, and like Jimmy Broadbent has a community. He has followers. He has people that support not only sim racing, but him in general. And if he's in a race, they're always going to go to their community and hang out with their people, if you will. So it does make sense that a lot of these broadcasts are not really viewed as much as they, I guess I would say, should be, just because you get a kind of an alternate view. But that kind of goes along with the whole content creator and just landscape that we're in now. You almost find your group by finding someone on Twitch or YouTube or wherever they happen to be streaming, and you kind of gravitate towards just that stream. I'm guilty of it as well. So I watch Call of Duty a lot during the day, and I always watch the same exact people. I never like journey outside, even though I know the people they play with or race against if I'm watching racing, but I never switch to the other side of the pond, if you will. I never go to that other stream. And that's something that, like, we'll have to, as event organizers, we're going to have to figure out how to pull them on over to watch like the official streams, or it would be nice if there was a platform that could support it, like when Twitch was trying to do their squad streams, where you could watch multiples and switch between all of them at different times, but no one's really perfected that quite yet.
I think, what I'd say is, we found some, as sim staff, some really, really good broadcasting freelance talent from Gridfinder, to be honest. And part of me is like, great, these guys are incredible. But the other part of me kind of feels bad for them in a way, because like you said, everyone goes and watches the drivers competing, and it's great for their personal brands. Let's not take away from that. But these are really, really good talent who, if it was at a LAN venue, would probably be building up quite a big following. And you look at Call of Duty, some of the hosts are like massive personalities. It's unreal, like the following they can build. And it's, I guess, like Tom said at the start, it's such an ecosystem that it needs to piece together, and I don't quite think we're there yet.
It's one of the other issues that we have, I think, and you touched on it earlier, Josh, is about personalities and emotions in sim racing, and that's something that we discussed on the podcast before. Is a problem like sim racers, it's sometimes tough to get much emotion out of them or get much character from them for the story. The race can be
boring for the driver too. Like, you're just like, okay,
but I mean even in terms of like social media presence or like the interviews afterwards, it can be like a little dry. And Chris, you made a point earlier, and you said, like some drivers just want to drive, and that should be fine. I would actually disagree, because if you compare it directly to real world motorsport, those drivers have to have sponsor appeal. So if they're going to make it into motorsport, they have to not only be fast, but they also have to give off the right kind of impression, the right brand.
This reminds me of
put their label on them.
Ford versus Ferrari, where they didn't want him to drive because he's like not good for the brand. That's all I'm picturing in my head.
Well, I mean, It's so true. And I think if sim racing is going where we all hope it's going, then drivers who want to make it are going to have to start building personal brand and be sponsorable. If they want Fanatec or Acetec or Trak Racer or whoever to put the label on them, they're not going to want to put their label on someone who is just, yes, I had a good race, could have done better.
Now I'm picturing Talladega.
Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's a little bit like that.
Where?
No, but I think you're right, Tom, and that doesn't need to be fabricated, right? Like that can be something as simple as we get them in the rig at the LAN event, they have a great race or a really bad race, and the moment they get out, we put them into like a press pen, you know, and it's just capturing that emotion, because then they're not thinking about how they're being presented. And they can just naturally talk to the press, and over time it will evolve. And the esports teams have done a really, really good job of this, to be fair, helping to educate and inform the drivers. So it's a really interesting point that you make there, definitely.
Yeah, and as much as, like, you know, what I was saying earlier, that we're trying to learn from esports, not necessarily sim racing, we can learn a little bit from motorsports here, because if you look at probably the two most popular Formula One drivers with the younger generation, so I'm discounting kind of, you know, Alonso, and I'm talking Daniel Ricciardo and Lando Norris, right? So neither of them have broken any records for number of races won or championships or anything like this. Like they're kind of, their stats as drivers, I think it's fair to say, are fairly kind of average, but they are so attractive to Formula One teams because they are so brandable, because they have this personality. Like Lando has his streaming, he has his kind of like stand base, if you like. Daniel Ricciardo is just so full of character. Like, but you know, he did pretty well at Red Bull. Nothing, you know, and he has. You remember his wins because you remember that he dived into the pool at Monaco, not because he won so many races and it was particularly good. Like he was hanging on at the end, blah blah blah. So, but you only know that story because he's somebody whose story you care about, because he comes across as a likable person. Sure. And so I think, you know, sim racers, you know, I've kind of turned this a little bit now. I don't mean like against sim racers, but I do think that if you want to be a professional esports sim racer, you do have to accept that you're going to have to build a bit of a brand. There's only so many people who can get away with the Kimi Räikkönen Iceman. If you have everyone doing that, it's boring. Right? And that's basically what we have now. We have like 24 Icemen, which doesn't work. It doesn't work.
No, it's really interesting. I think the other part of that is that it doesn't need to be just in a competitive environment. You know, a lot of people think sim racing events are ESL, F1 Esports, all this kind of stuff, but there's so many activations throughout the year that get run when you see a sim rig, and like even just then, the opportunity for someone to jump in a rig for the first time, chat to someone from insert team here, and go, actually, I kind of enjoyed that. Oh, this person knows what they're talking about. That's enough to kind of convert someone to follow. And for me, again, is like why it's so important that we've just got these events, because when people aren't expecting them, it's really, really cool. You know, they're not having to see what's on a Tuesday night at 7 p.m. It's like, I'm going to the shopping center. There's a sim rig. I'll try it out. You know.
So, Josh, I think we've probably fixed sim racing.
Sounds like it. Yeah,
it's been great. So thanks for that. But let's go back to sim stuff a little bit and talk about what's in the pipeline, what's happening. Like, tell us a little bit about your vision for sim stuff, where you want to take it, how much you want it to grow, like the team, are you hiring? Like, give us the story of what's happening next for sim stuff.
Yeah, so it probably sounds a bit converse to everyone we've discussed, right? But, you know, the reality is sim racing is still growing massively. It's doing really, really well. And so for us as a business, really, we have kind of two key staffing elements that we service. The first one is that if you are someone who already owns a sim rig, or you're a company that owns sim rigs, you know, we provide the staffing to service and maintain those. So we're working with some really cool venues and facilities and kind of scheduling some more in the future. But the other part of it is like this live event side. So if you're someone like, I don't know, Trak Racer, ADAC, Fanatec, you know, at the moment, a lot of sim racing manufacturers are still quite small in terms of, you know, number of people. So if they want to go to Sim Expo or they want to go to Insomnia, like they're losing sometimes, you know, 25% to 30% of their workforce. And we can kind of come in and fill that gap by having people who know sim racing from ground zero. So it's the perfect reflection of their brand. So, you know, I guess what I'm trying to say is that as we see sim racing growing and people kind of exploring and testing new things, and that comes also twofold from, you know, the trust in people like yourselves and kind of guiding them. For us, you know, the growth is immense, and we're really seeing some positive trends, not only in the UK and Europe, but also North America and Asia as well.
And what are the kind of the headline events that you'd that you like? I mean, you mentioned earlier the Olympics. Like, did you put a bid in for the Olympics? I mean, like how big? What are kind of what are the targets to give like our listeners an idea of like what does success look like for sim stuff?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's some really cool players in the space. Obviously, AK being one of the ones that we've mentioned to before. I think what's nice about sim staff is we're not set out to try and run the world's best events. We're there to provide the staff to help those companies do so. So, for me, the target is people like Formula One, Formula E, ESL. And, some of those are already having really positive, growth towards. Other ones, it's going to take a bit more time. But, equally, a large volume of our events are kind of day-to-day activations for teams and their sponsors and partners. So if we can keep that growing, I think it all just has that snowball effect and gives us that kind of reputation to be trusted, really, which is quite important for me.
And what about if we've got listeners who are into broadcasting or commentating, or generally just have been, adjusting and setting up their own rig for the last 5 years and become a bit of an expert on, aluminium profile? What are the sort of roles that you're looking for?
Yeah, for sure. So our main focus are our event technicians and managers. So what that really means is that the managers are the people on site who, when you go to a stand, you're kind of engaging with them. They're overseeing what's happening throughout the day. Really the main source of knowledge if there's a problem that gets escalated. Our event technicians, though, is like our highest volume of staff. And this could be anything from running the sims at an event to, doing a customer's updates at their house versus, running a venue. And really, that's the big thing is like networking, because there's so kind of come back to what I was saying before, like the space is so small at the moment that it's really hard to find good quality candidates. And people have now started to trust sim staff to do that. But I need to grow my network of candidates as well, right? So if anyone is interested, it is hugely important. And I think it comes back to, Tom, what we said before, like there is a world in which, people are running leagues. And if they want to then start running LAN events for their league, that they can do that in that ecosystem by working with people like us.
I feel like we probably need to restart our conversations about that little collaboration between Gridfinder and Sim Stuff at some point. It sounds really exciting. It sounds really, it's exciting that there is a requirement for businesses like yours now, because that is a really positive signal for the rest of sim racing. Josh, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. This has been a really, really cool chat. It's been nice to hear about your journey, as I keep saying. And I hear it back.
What was it, organic journey
I
or
don't even know how to say your story, your organic.
I'm adding super networker to the CV on LinkedIn. So
this
as quoted by Sim Sunday's podcast.
Oh my god, I've changed, man. I've changed. I hate myself. Josh, where can people find you /Sim Staff if they wanted to know more?
Yeah, I mean, like every good company, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, just search for Sim Staff. You'll find the company there, and you'll find me mostly there as well. If not, from the sounds of things, at most events, I'll kind of be there, probably bumping into Tom as well. So yeah, that's probably the best way to do it.
Great.
Very cool.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
You guys,
it's been great to chat. Thanks. And we'll see you again.